Good afternoon. I'm Fern Dunn and I'm the Comms Coordinator for the Southwest Creative Technology Network. Welcome to today's talk, Critical Voices in Data, in partnership with Control Shift. Let me tell you a bit about our projects. SWCTN is funded by Research England's Connecting Capability Fund, linking research to development by expanding the use of creative technologies and supporting business growth across the Southwest region of the UK. We are exploring the themes of immersion, automation, and data. Our focus on creative technology brings together arts, design, computer science, engineering, and business development to deliver new products and services. We're so pleased to be working with Control Shift, an exciting new arts programme happening in Bristol this autumn. It's 3 weeks of workshops, discussions, installations, and screenings, online and across Bristol, exploring ways to reframe and rethink our relationship with technology. The Control Shift programme reflects on the intimate relationship we have had with technology over the past 6 months and asks questions such as, what impact do these technologies have on our minds and bodies? How could we digitally connect differently? Who is creating the digital tools we have become increasingly reliant on? And who explores what happens when we reimagine digital tools through different lenses? For more details and the full programme, visit www.control-shift.network. It's a busy week for us at SWCTN, as we're also looking forward to an incredible data talk on Thursday from Natalie Ziemana. In this talk, Natalie will be asking how we can imagine and reimagine what we have come to understand about emotions as they relate to emerging technologies. We then have our automation showcase on Friday, celebrating our amazing year of automation, from exploring prototypes, our publication launch, and exploring inclusion and its relationships with creative technology. Both these events are free, and we'll pop the links to the tickets in the chat. But for now, I would like to introduce today's speakers, Southwest Creative Technology Network Fellows, Pete Quinn-Davis, Annie Blanchette, Grace Quantock, and Michelle Forrest Becket, for a series of petcha kucha talks exploring critical voices in data. There's a Q&A at the end, with the talk running around 30 minutes. If you'd like to ask a question, pop them in the chat window and I'll pick them out and ask our speakers. A captioned and recorded version of this talk will be available here after the talk is finished. And just to let you know that there will be references to burlesque and trauma, with references to abuse, trauma, and then the effects. But for now, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Peter.
Thanks, Fern. Well, hello, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to the Control Shift Festival today. My name is Pete Quinn-Davis, and I work with Creative Technologies. The work explores a variety of media that includes photography, digital fabrication, digital scanning, sculpture, ceramics, and film. And the main themes I really work with are seriality, materiality, and ephemera. It's exploring temporal themes also, like ideas of time, space, history, memory, and how these concepts relate and intersect. I think the stuff of computers and digital infrastructure is often hidden out of sight, and huge power imbalances exist around who is making technology and who benefits from it. Yet the impact of our interactions with machines and technologies are very much rooted in the body, in materials and emotions, just like the old technologies were, which is where I'm going to start. So let's press play. In 1745, a man rode his horse into Cornwall. He'd done the journey many times before, delivering medicine to apothecaries in the area. And he stopped for his lunch on Tregonning Hill, overlooking Pra Sands. He was feeling pretty satisfied with life. He was doing well. He was well connected. His faith was strong. He was a Quaker. He was newly married. He was loving life. And as he contemplated his riches, he noticed that the earth around him was white in patches. And as the rain started to fall on that October afternoon, it ran white into the gullies over the granite and down the hill. He quickly packed up and took a scoop of this white gold, wrapped it up and put it in one of his saddlebags. This could sound like a fairly ordinary opportunist-packed lunch, and I suppose it was. William Cookworthy, the guy on the horse, discovered English porcelain, which revolutionized the ceramic trade in the UK thereafter. And it's particularly relevant to Bristol, as the factory that was first set up in Plymouth in 1765 came to Bristol in 1770. And Plymouth porcelain became Bristol porcelain, before eventually becoming Wedgwood. And although the discovery of the material has technical significance in the development of fine porcelain, it is the choice of how and what it represented that first had attracted me to it. Examples of antique ceramics, as we know, are usually located in museums. In this case, 3 of our museums here in Bristol, 1 in Plymouth and the V&A in London, usually hidden within glass cases within a myriad of other bits and bobs. This is just how I came across this group, made by the Cookworthy technicians to champion Plymouth porcelain. 4 slightly awkward figures, glazed and unglazed. The more I inquired and began a research process, the more the data hidden in these figures revealed themselves. After preliminary testing with that clay he found on Tregoran Hill and the production of fairly crude vessels and ornaments, he felt to rival the Chinese porcelain trade, he would have to deliver a range of pieces that had a sophisticated and parlour appeal. He went to London to the Vauxhall factory and saw what he understood to be the 4 virtues, like the 4 seasons, the 4 winds, the 4 points of the compass. They loved the 4s back then, and somewhere between Plymouth and London, he bought from Hemmersley, the plaster cast maker, these 4 figures. Remember that they would have been in 5 to 7 parts, multiplied by 4, quite small, labelled and wrapped carefully. Cast makers were like file sharers back in the day. And anyway, Cookworthy returned to Plymouth, where it made the first pourings and found that in fact he'd been sold the 4 continents. What the hell, he probably thought, let's just carry on. So if we drop the narrative around the making of these artifacts and focus a bit more on the context now, it might give us a bit more of a sense to the way physical data can reveal different things. Whilst acknowledging their historical context as objects of mainstream consumption that represented a colonialist, Eurocentric, reductionist worldview that is considered problematic in a modern setting, I started to engage with exploring how the geographical identities of these figurines and their physical structure might be broken down and reconstructed in a way that helps us engage with a contemporary model of representation, one of surface, one of latency, one of new geography and new identity. As a site at which the codified meanings of the figurine's design and the haptic and visual experience of the consumer come together, considering the surface properties of these objects, it provided a way of linking historic and contemporary contacts with these embodied identities. And I used a range of research to discover these layers, historic, material, scientific, and practical, through the use of digital scanning. Exploring our contemporary experience of these surfaces through the lens of modern technology, reconstructing the objects through a series and process of LiDAR scanning and realization that probed, captured, and rendered the surface of these figurines. I discovered that in the scanning process, the smooth white surface of the figurine's skin, originally designed to showcase Cookworthy's technique for imitating Chinese porcelain, reacted very differently to the detailed, textured, and coloured surface of the dress and decorative attributes with which the figure's geographical identities were constructed and imbued. Some of my interest lies in the juxtaposition of these 2 surfaces in the context of the original figurines and their reconstruction, and considers how they build upon one another in the creation of the identity of the 4 quarters of the world, and subsequently how the presence and absence of different surfaces within the same figure could frame a customer's experience of the figurines. Despite the steady increase in accuracy, most available scanning techniques cause severe scanning noise, outliners, holes, or ghost geometry. These actually can prove the most interesting. To apply the sophisticated modeling operations of these data sets, substantial post-processing is usually required. What was of interest, of course, was the reverse of this. It was the disruptive potential of the surface and its potential to create a transgressive surface quality or atmosphere, somehow delivering a more contemporary sense of a new object, reflecting the far past but folding into the future. Thinking about how to create different relationships through and in data. Understanding the impact of our interactions with machines and technologies while still realizing they are new material, still connected to the body and emotions, just like the old technologies, but with new inclusive histories. Now I'd like to turn over the screen to Annie, who will be talking about what she's been focusing on in her data exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Hello. So I'm not going to make much of an introduction here. I'm just going to jump into the petcha talk. Thank you. In 1868, Lydia Thompson and her troupe, the British Blondes, brought burlesque to North America. What people saw on stage, a group of larger, scantily clad women, aping men, satirizing the establishment and asserting their embodied presence and desire, was revolutionary. Lydia and her troupe was a complete reversal of the highbrow, sleek, ethereal ballerina idealized and allowed to take up stage as female until then. Embracing the grotesque and carnivalesque, the low, the profane, the embodied, the show was a sensation. It created new possibilities, models of femininity, not valued until then. It also caused moral outrage, as the burlesque performer was seen as a debasing force for women. As a commercial success, though, the girly show genre was soon reappropriated by business-savvy, male-driven productions. But as the transgressive performer was deemed too messy or too hot to handle, the performances underwent a process of sanitization. The performer was stripped out of her transgressive characteristics, rendered more passive and decorative, desirable, but with no desire or voice of her own. What I'd like to make here is a broad stroke parallel with the process of datification. We strip data, often coming from people thus datified, into more palatable, usable units of observation. The way we communicate the resulting outcomes also need to be sleek and simple, so to fit communications outlets that struggle to cope with mess and ambiguity. I'd also like to make a link between the idealization of the highbrow, sleek performer who both preceded and succeeded the burlesque performer, and the idealization of the data scientist or researcher, both stemming from a Western dualist view of the world where the low subjective body is to be controlled or cured by the higher objective mind. Researchers are often portrayed as heroic, intellectually refined entities, generally male, and untainted by subjectivity and their bodily propensity. As a well-known advertising trope used to adorn the token expert, the white lab coat, which confers credibility and authority, can be linked with the modernist idea of ornament is crime, where the sleek lines and curves of sculptures, buildings, or Apple devices are hailed as a sign of intellectual refinement and spiritual elevation. Conversely, the ornate is seen as betraying the low, embodied subjectivity, the cultural, the ethnic, or feminine sensibilities seen as distasteful, grotesque, and inferior. This is why I'm coming back to burlesque as a genre seen as female, low, and inferior, as the antithesis of highbrow research, as a genre that allowed different identities and voice to emerge and take place. I believe the carnivalesque and grotesque practices in burlesque can be used as a critical device and as a means to elicit alternative voices, perspectives, and identities in research. So carnivalesque is a literary mode that challenged the dominant assumptions, so the dualist idea of the mind needing to control the body. It's associated with celebrations such as feasts, dance, and plays, where the high becomes low, the pauper becomes king. Carnivalesque practices as observed in the burlesque genre include the amplification to highlight the faux or to create a distance from the ideal, spoofing to delegitimize the ideal and create a space for the non-ideal. They use bricolage to mix aesthetic sensibilities and ideas to disrupt the linear syntax of daily life. This could be used to disrupt the research process or sleek research output. There's the notion of ambiguity and hybridization to blur the frontiers of time, identity, as well as between the ideal and the non-ideal. Some performances can be seen as transgressing the ideal while adopting elements of the grotesque. The carnivalesque is closely associated with the grotesque, which sits firmly on the side of the body and revalues what is otherwise erased via the idealization of sleekness, bodily propensity, processes such as birth aging and decay, subjectivity that are deemed too messy or disavowed by researchers. So finally, the burlesque stage is also allows for the creation of liminal reflective spaces where roles and positions are questions, akin to a palace of mirrors. There's often this idea of breaking the fourth wall and disrupting the power relation between the performer and the audience. I've been exploring a range of carnivalesque approaches to research, from the hyperbolic researcher that shows the strings under the lab coat, the researcher as trickster, or the idea of the playful role reversal between researcher and research. I'd love to come up with a whole cabinet of curiosity of carnivalesque research practices, reappropriating a low genre that is the predecessor of highbrow museum in research, and deflecting attention from the traditional objective research onto the researcher and the process of research itself. Through this data fellowship, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with data fellow and visual artist Dane Watkins, and we had this idea of build a satirical machine learning priest to identify and quantify sins and devise penance. It's a sacrilegious idea and thus grotesque in a sense. So using crowdsourced and generally humoristic confessions, the grotesque confessional is drawing attention to the bias inherent in the process, amplifying it and thus reinstating this belief about similar processes used to make real life decisions. I invite you to pay a visit to the priest who is currently in training and thus experience what carnivalesque research might be one example of. So to sum up, I believe the carnivalesque practice used in the low burlesque genre can challenge the idealization at play in research. Much like old burlesque performance, these practices allow new identity possibilities and insights to emerge, unconstrained by the idealization of sleek, highbrow research. Thank you. And now I would like to give the screen to Grace.
Thank you, Annie. Hello, everybody. I'm Grace Quantock. I'm delighted to be here with you. And just a content warning before I begin. My talk is going to mention abuse and trauma and the impacts, but there will be no graphic descriptions. So can we press play, please, and get started? Thank you. Hello. I am Grace Quantock, and I am a psychotherapeutic counsellor, writer, and researcher. I'm a New Talent Fellow with the Southwest Creative Technology Network in Data, and I'm here today to speak with you about trauma in technology and how what we can't see shapes our designs and our users' experiences. And if you take one thing away from the 6 minutes and 40 seconds that I get to spend with you today, I'd like you to make it that trauma may be invisible, but its effects are not. We can see the data of how trauma impacts individuals, family systems, communities, societies, and shapes our art and how we envisage our futures. But before we can see that, we need to recognize that behavior as the impacts of trauma. So what's the situation? Trauma can be carried unconsciously, and it can be impacting our data gathering because we aren't seeing its invisible presence, but we are charting its impact, and this skews our results. If we want to engage audiences, I believe we have to take trauma into account. Particularly right now, we are all living through a globally traumatic experience with COVID, with extensive death, grief, loss, people shielding and in lockdown. I'm in both right now. And people who aren't able to access many of the resources they've previously relied upon for physical, mental, and social health and well-being. And with climate crisis and political tensions rising, the level of trauma is only increasing. If we ignore it, we contribute to it and perpetuate the problem. Trauma is the data we carry. It's encoded in us. And trauma, therefore, is a factor in designing for user experience in creative technology. So as a psychotherapeutic counsellor and a writer, my work is embedded in the collection, processing, understanding, and sharing of narratives. And this embodied human data is rich, and often when working with people with multiple marginalized and oppressed identities, it can be very overwhelming. Many areas of psychological theory oriented disturbance and distress in an individual's psychological processes. But many layers of data are often feeding into an individual's experience. So cultural, relational, intergenerational, socio-historical, transpersonal, transhistoric layers are impacting each individual process and interaction. And all of these interweaving layers of narrative, experience, and understanding can, in individuals with heavy trauma loads, contribute to overwhelm. So this overwhelm can trigger, for people with a lot of trauma, a trauma response where activated into fight, flight, friend, flop, and freeze. When we disengage relationally and our user then can't consent or take choiceful action. So I'm building my work on the work of international experts, Van der Kolk, Babette Rothschild, Peter Levine, and there isn't time, of course, to cover all the concepts here. But I do have a quick way that we can start to begin an introduction to thinking about trauma and engagement from my research traumula. So the first one is fight. Now you may have come across this, you have fight or flight. And fight, we recognize, we know this as an activation response well. But in the instance around digital work, it may show up as a user struggling with the interface, with the concept or the controls. So fight can be that level where we up, where you become activated. And then we have flight. So we all know the thing, you know, the tiger and you run away, there's flight. But in this instance, flight can often be where we see disengagement, where we see boredom, where we see people dropping off, clicking away, voting with their feet, voting with their wheels, voting with their clicker fingers, and they go. And then we have freeze. Freeze is a little more unknown to many of us, but it's when we become inert. It's when we become static. There's a pause in our executive functioning where we can't decide, we can't move forward. We just become stuck. And so if we're seeing this for users, if there's places, then that's something to think about. And then we have friend as a response. Now, generally, this is when the person who's experienced abuse may try to be safe, befriend a perpetrator or an abuser to try and protect themselves, to try and escape and get out. In this instance, thinking of a user, we may find the user looking for answers, hacks, or guides. And then lastly, we have flop. So flop is where it's a little bit like freeze. It's like where we could become an automaton. So we'll follow the rules, we'll go through the maze, but we're not really there or engaging relationally. There's no consent, there's no awakeness, there's no aliveness. So how does this relate to my research and to wider work in data? Well, rather than taking creative technology into the therapeutic process or into the individual's self-management, I am researching how creatives and technological culture makers can frame the delivery of their outputs to responsively and responsibly mediate an individual's data processing, particularly for people with significant trauma loads. How can creative technologists work in a trauma-informed way and titrate data delivery in a way that doesn't re-traumatize, activate, or increase trauma load? So that's what I'm exploring in my Traumula and trauma workshops to support digital designers and creative technologists to figure out how trauma and well-being awareness sits alongside, within, and through user experience research and work streams. Because engagement and playfulness require consent and capacity. In considering trauma in design, we are taking responsibility for our part in creating space for possibility in our work and our communities. So thank you for being here. Please connect with me at gracequantock.com, postcardsfrommargins.com to continue the conversation on tech and trauma. Thank you. And now I am handing over to Michelle. Thank you.
To love, my fire in the light, to chase a feather in the wind. Within the glow that weaves a cloak of delight, there moves a thread that has no end. Matters of the heart and mind. Mediated between drawing, data, model, machine. Sternberg's Triarchic theorem for love. Commitment equals orange, yellow, 54, 24. Intimacy equals green, blue, 33, 31. Passion equals pink, purple, 40, 58. 3 components of love generate 8 possible aspects of love. Combinations equals order doesn't matter. Permutations or ordered combinations without repetition equals n factorial over n minus r factorial. Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height. Highlighting the importance of realizing that the 8 aspects of love are, in fact, limiting cases. Sternberg states no relationship is likely to be a pure case of any of them. Wholehearted, heartache, heartbeat, heartburn, heartbreak, lose heart, take to heart, searching heart, heart disease, heart attack, heart surgery, change of heart, have a heart. The heart is divided into 2 halves. Each half has 2 chambers, called the atrium and ventricle. Broken heart syndrome is a condition in which intense emotional or physical stress can cause rapid and severe heart muscle weakness. Change of mind, frame of mind, mindset, mind blown, mind game, mind control, lose your mind, state of mind, mind expanding, mind altering, open your mind, speak your mind, make up your mind. Never mind. Split brain or callosal syndrome is when the corpus callosum, that connects the 2 hemispheres of the brain, is severed to some degree. Time for you and time for me. And time yet for 100 indecisions. And for 100 visions and revisions. Left, right, highlight. Consummate love equals 48 combinations containing 3 sets. Orange yellow 54, 24. Green blue 33, 31. And pink purple 40, 58. Consummate love equals an ideal relationship, where couples who experience this kind of love have great sex several years into their relationship, and cannot imagine themselves with anyone else. Typified as a whirlwind courtship, passion motivates commitment, without the stabilizing influence of intimacy. Fatuous love equals 24 combinations containing 3 sets. Orange yellow 54, 24, pink purple 40, 58 and 0, 0. Stronger than friendship, with deep affection, but minimal or no sexual desire. Companionate love equals 24 combinations containing 3 sets. Orange yellow 54, 24, green blue 33, 31 and 0, 0. Partners of intimate conversations and sexual passion, but long-term commitment is undecided. Romantic love equals 24 combinations containing 3 sets. Green blue 33, 31, pink purple 40, 58 and 0, 0. Friendship love is when intimacy is present, but feelings of passion or commitment in the romantic sense are missing. Friendship love equals 6 combinations containing 3 sets. Green blue 33, 31, 0, 0 and 0, 0. But commitment to love can deteriorate into empty love, or an arranged marriage may start empty, but flourish into another form of love over time. Empty love equals 6 combinations containing 3 sets. Orange yellow 54, 24. 0, 0 and 0, 0. Infatuation is characterized by feelings of lust and physical passion. Infatuated love equals 6 combinations containing 3 sets. Pink purple 40, 58. 0, 0 and 0, 0. Left, right, left, right. Total blackout. Non-love refers simply to the absence of all 3 components of love. Non-love equals 0, 0. 0, 0 and 0, 0. Constructing love stories and love spells. Spellbinding, spellbound, expel. Am I haunting you? Are you haunting me? Making love equals triangles of action plus triangles of feeling. But will I catch up with you, or will you connect with me? The outcome remains the same. Logical response equals give up. Don't give up. There's more at stake than logic.
Sorry, old Zoom error there. Hi everyone, welcome back. I just want to say thank you very much to Pete, Annie, Grace and Michelle. That was some absolutely fascinating talks. And now we're going to launch into the Q&A section. So I just wanted to start off just by asking, based on all that amazing research that you've done, what's next for your projects?
Shall I go first?
Go for it.
That particularly those objects are only one particular strand of the research so far. So I've moved my research already away from the object itself into the more environmental landscape scanning, which I'm kind of conducting now. But that research is kind of ongoing, and there are lots of outcomes from it. Particularly, there's a series of seating which will be shown in reasonably prestigious venues soon, sometime in June or July. I must just apologise for my plumber just breaking into my presentation earlier on. That was just really quite outrageous. But anyway, there you go.
Shall I go second?
Sure.
Okay, so the intent behind my data fellowship is was to study to study and challenge the datification process that's happening in education, because we have this tendency to sort of flatten identities, and it can be quite consequential for, well, within the way we deliver education, but also, you know, the way forward for the future of children. So I was sort of trapped with this idea of I wanted to get the voices out for students, like get their voices, get their perspectives. But I was also kind of stuck in this paradigm of just getting more data out and thus further datifying them. So I was looking for a way to sort of move beyond this. And this is where I went back to the idea of burlesque, the carnivalesque practices, which I've studied before, like 10 years ago. So it's not the most current thing, but because of this collaboration with Dane, who's also interested in carnivalesque and grotesque, I went back to this framework. And so my idea for the future, for the way forward, is to sort of find how these carnivalesque practices could be used as a means to kind of subvert that datification and like still sort of engage with students, get their perspectives, but to avoid from getting them sort of objectified in that process. So that's what I'm looking into.
And for you, Grace?
I am really excited. So what I'm doing is working now with some designers and prototypes across different aspects of creative technology spectrum, and going into beta testing for my Traumula workshop, where I will be leading designers through, or we're co-creating through a process of how trauma can sit within their work and research streams.
Sounds amazing. And
thank you.
And finally, Michelle, who is on screen for the first time. Oh, Michelle, you're on mute.
That'd be amazing if Michelle started talking like the avatar then as well. That would be funny.
We'll let Michelle sort out just her sound issues 1 second, and I'll move on to the next question, which Becca Rose in the chat says, "Thank you for sharing your research and data. I was wondering how the research lives in the world. Are there any examples of how people have been responding or engaging to your work?" And we'll go round and we'll start off with Pete again.
Yeah, there are lots of things coming up. Because we're only halfway through the data at fellowship at the moment, it's kind of quite hard to do some sharing on a major scale. But there are things coming up, and there's lots of ideas about outside projections, objects themselves being remade in fabrication, lots of kind of participatory ideas involving people as well. So yeah, lots of ideas and potentials, but we've still to formulate kind of where and when is going to be best.
And then Annie?
So in the context of this research at the moment, there's the data priest, which is currently in training. So the idea with carnivalesque research, it's mostly about the process versus the outcome itself. So taking part in the research is just as important as the sort of, findings we will have out of this. So I'd like to invite you to go populate your sins in the confessional, because this is technically, this is carnivalesque research in action.
And then Grace?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it's something which I think when I applied for the fellowship, I expected and hoped and saw that happening for me at least a lot more than it has done to date, simply because I've been in my house since March. As a disabled woman, I'm shielding, I'm also a carer, and I am also now living under local lockdown. So it has definitely, it is touching the world in terms of interviews and interest in people who wanted to work with it. And of course, I'm disseminating it through talks like this and through lovely people like you who are listening and hopefully possibly maybe sharing it if you think it's useful or beneficial to somebody. So, I mean, my answer really is not as much as I would have hoped, but as much as we are able to connect with each other.
Fantastic. So actually, Grace, I had a small question for you. I loved what you said, that trauma is the data that we carry.
How do I turn you?
Oh, sorry, bear with us. We've just got a few technical issues.
Yep. So, you need headphones?
Oh, I think, have we got Michelle back? We have Michelle back. Grace, yeah, I loved what you said, that trauma is the data that we carry with us. Are you able to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, it's something which I believe it depends on what your understanding and interpretation of data is. If we interpret data as something which can be measured, which arises from experiences or events, and which is something which we can see the impacts of, then I think trauma absolutely is data. And whereas we may see data as something as kind of big data that's being held on us, or personal data that's being stored and kind of tracking us, trauma can also live in us in terms of memories or flashbacks of traumatic events. When I say memories, I'm not necessarily talking about a kind of memory like a videotape. Trauma memory is often very fragmented and particulate, and often can be something which is quite is not a simple and linear narrative. There can be a lot of confusion in it, but none of that means that it's not something that you experienced. It just that can be the nature of the memory of trauma, because the events are so traumatic, and potentially because we may be quite dissociated in some of them. We might be in shock or fight or flight or freeze, and not in a space where, you know, we're gently taking in information in a clear, calm narrative which we lay down and recall frequently later. That's not the nature of trauma memory. But it is definitely something that is carried, and is certainly something that's felt. We have now research about intergenerational trauma passing down, about grandchildren showing trauma markers, biological trauma markers, which relate to what their grandparents survived and experienced, including survivors of concentration camps. So I think that's kind of where I'm drawing that idea from. But it's a big topic, and there's some great authors writing about it. So if something interests anybody, I really encourage you to check out some of the work. I named some of the authors that I really appreciate on that in the talk.
Thank you so much, Grace. Now that we have Michelle back, Michelle, and we've got your face. We've not got the video. Can you please explain a bit more about your project?
I can. Sorry about that. Technical issues. I'm currently working with a simple data set in my drawings, but it's what lies behind the data, the layers of complexity created through like diverging connections, which I'm trying to turn on its head. So I'm trying to create an encounter between the image, the subjects, and technology. And I don't aim to solve any problems through my practice. I want to intensify the problem to draw attention to it. So there's no hypotheses that I'm trying to prove. I'm just trying to get on the inside of the machine world to work with data and question how we're evolving alongside this technology, becoming a digitalized self. So the drawings are, in a sense, a visual instrument that shape patterns within data, which is like a literacy beyond words. It explores a dimensional space of the digital.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Annie, just a question for you. You mentioned the AI priest. Would you mind going into a bit more detail about that?
Yes. Okay. So Dane has been responsible for the programming and all the sort of backend, and also the amazing grotesque illustrations that are, that are the envelopes of that is the envelope of the project. In my case, so we kind of came from two different angles, because from his side, he was really interested in the idea of quantification of sins, which has been like this sort of long-standing idea priests have been sort of studying and trying to address, to determine how to determine the value of a sin and give the adequate penance. So it's been like a very serious endeavor, and because he's been studying the idea of medieval manuscripts and this all sort of like what comes with it. He's been really interested in this, and he's been sort of so he instigated this really interesting idea. From my perspective, one thing I find really interesting is how his way of representing research, because my background is in research, like in marketing research more specifically. And there's this idea that an instrument of research needs to be very sleek and very objective, unbiased, not to sway the informant into one direction or the other. Whereas in this case, and I know he's been doing some other amazing work for Arnolfini, there's like, he just really invests this whole sort of subjectivity within the process. And I think it's quite interesting, because I think you can still get some interesting insights, but obviously your perspective as a researcher is different. And also it sort of suspends this idea that, like, it reinstates some form of criticality. I've never heard so many comments about, like a tool to collect data to be so sort of objective. So it's kind of interesting, because in a way the participant starts getting involved in that sort of process of knowledge making and queries it. So there's different areas. It's kind of a moving, it's like a moving sort of piece of research. So I'm still engaging with it and trying to find what sort of insights and what sort of practices this could lead to.
Thank you so much, Annie. And Michelle, we've got another question for you in the chat. I'm so intrigued. Can you tell us more about how you made your video?
How I made the video. So I've been making drawings probably for a week. So now I have about 20 drawings, and I haven't worked out how many iterations there could actually be of these drawings, but I think it's into the tens of thousands. I'm quite enjoying the slow process of creating the data. And I think, thinking through what's behind it, the personal reasons for looking at low of the, all of the information that you can Google that will lead you off onto different tangents, it almost becomes quite overwhelming. And I think I do develop patterns in thinking and in drawing, and I guess it's just a mashup between my ideas. And I've created this logic that works behind the drawings, and I guess if you have a series of them alongside on a wall, it would be probably easier to kind of work out where it's going. But I'm just kind of feeling my way through. I think that's when you're a practice-based researcher, you kind of leaving yourself open to the process to see where it leads. And I already feel it's quite intense. I don't know how intense it's going to get.
kind of interesting that the voice gives another layer of authenticity to the data itself. So you kind of really super believe the voice telling you that actually this is true. And maybe if the voice wasn't there, you kind of wouldn't have that connection of complexity, which I really liked. I love that that voice. I'd put into the chat, actually. I'm just going to be hearing 0, 0, 0, 0.
I was chanting it randomly yesterday. I think I've gone through the presentation that much that it's become in my mindset. But it's interesting picking up on when Annie talked about the bricoleur. I was reading something recently in an amazing book called What Comes After Fast by Hal Foster. And he writes a chapter about the artist Hito Steyl and how he links her practice to the condition apophenia, which is about making connections and meaningful patterns, but the patterns could be meaningless data. And I think it's interesting looking at the connections that we all make between things. It might be logical to some and not to others. There's also another interesting author called David Shields who wrote Reality Hunger, and he presents a collage of unreferenced quotations in this book, and it absolutely destabilizes any genre and time. And I think the New York Times even quoted saying something that he creates a rhythm that overwhelms and overpowers. And I think that's how I feel with the internet. A lot of the time when you're on form, you're like, wow, this world of information. And then other times it just feels overwhelming.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's all the questions we've got time for now. So I just want to say another thank you to Peter, Annie, Grace and Michelle. And sorry, I've just completely lost my train of thought. And so, yeah, just a reminder that we are from the Southwest Creative Technology Network, and we'll be starting our autumn season of data talks on Thursday. And also we have our automation showcase on Friday. So we really, really hope that you can join us for either one of those. And if you want any more information on the amazing projects from our fellows, then please go to www.swctn.org.uk. And thank you and goodbye.